Recording. Bienvenidos todos, todas y todes a la última sesión del ciclo Existir entre espectros. El día de hoy tenemos el inmenso placer de tener a Jason Mohaghegh con nosotros. Le agradecemos muchísimo estar con nosotros. Y pues bueno, voy a hacer una pequeña introducción sobre Jason. Jason Mohaghegh es profesor asociado de literatura comparada en Babson College, en donde ha impartido cursos sobre literatura global, filosofía, estudios culturales y artes visuales. Actualmente es director y profesor del programa de estudios transdisciplinarios para The New Center for Research and Practice, y también es fundador y director del Instituto Future Studies Program. Ha publicado 9 libros hasta la fecha, incluyendo Inflictions, The Writing of Violence, en el 2012 para Continuum, Omnicide en el 2019 para Urbanomic, Night, A Philosophy of the After Dark en el 2020 para Zero Books, y actualmente se encuentra terminando el segundo tomo de Omnicide para publicación este año. Sus intereses de investigación se centran en el rastreo de corrientes de pensamiento emergentes dentro del Medio Oriente y Occidente. En particular, énfasis con la exploración de los conceptos del caos, la violencia, la ilusión, el silencio, la locura, el futurismo, la desaparición y el pensamiento apocalíptico. Entonces, no siendo más, le doy el micrófono a Jason. Please, go ahead and thank you very much for being here.
Gracias a todos por estar aquí. Es un placer y un honor para mí también. Thank you to all of you for the invitation. I wanted to try, since I know this is the final segment in a series on ghosts and the dead, I wanted to flip the conventional association of ghosts as part of our linear past and instead spin the logic toward the futuristic paradigm. Okay. And ask, what would it mean for us to contemplate the future ghost or the future dead? Since future is also bound to phantasmatic experience, right? The unseen and the oncoming generations are also apparitional. And so it's an intriguing challenge for us to fathom what kind of technique might summon those figures approaching from the end of time. To attempt this, though, I actually wanted to take the most explosive and complex ritual of the ancient world, which always engaged with specters and vanished entities, which was the festival, and to try imagining the future festival in light of the extreme technologies and transformations that are occurring around us today with all this limitless potential. So to track the nature of the festival, which, as you all know, exists across countless early cultures, civilizations, tribes, I decided to share some thoughts from an absolutely brilliant thinker of the 20th century, Roger Caillois, who some of you may know. He was a close friend with the philosopher George Bataille, and together they founded a secret society called Acephale that would meet at night in a forest grove beside a tree that had been struck by lightning. And they would discuss ideas about sacrifice and ritual. So they were also engaged with ghostly topics and the questions of death. But I wanted to display some selected passages from a text that he wrote for the secret society, which was called Theory of the Festival. So that then tonight we can distort these various principles along a futuristic axis. So I'm going to share the screen, and so you can see some of the quotes that we'll use. Okay, this is visible to everyone?
Yes, Jason.
Perfect, thank you. So the first principle is that of the divine ancestor. And this is almost universally accurate in the history of festivals, which is that festivals are meant to honor the divine ancestors, which is to say that they are a certain micro-universe, which opens and closes for a single night, a single week, month, however long, that allows a certain portal between the present and the ancients who supposedly formed what we call reality itself. And this is why Caillois notes that the dead are allowed to circulate among the living during this special interval of the festival. And he gives just one anthropological example here that we'll read together. And if you see the quote, he says, "The souls wander at large in the city for 3 days in May, after which each family head chases them out of his house by spitting out berries, which discharges him and his family from incursion until the following year. The return of the dead is often linked to times of change. In all Europe, it is mainly during St. Sylvester's Eve, that is during the last night of the year, that ghosts, specters, and phantoms are permitted to be rampant among the living." So in that vein, the festival is a night of paroxysm and metamorphosis that's meant to relive a lost golden age, where the ancients supposedly were capable of supernatural acts, and they lived amid lands of absolute richness. So if you know anything about origin myths, it's always this retro utopian dream of a beginning time, where these ancient ancestors of ours had miraculous powers. They could fly, they could teleport across space, they could move mountains with their brute force, they could transform into animals or become invisible. And the earth in that beginning time is also portrayed as inexhaustibly generous with resources for these heroes. So they're sharing everything in abundance. There's no hunger, no famine, disease, plague, no infant mortality. And that's why the great opulence of the festival, you know, these banquets and feasts of self-gorging, they're intended to performatively reproduce the chaos of this bygone exceptional world, this paradise of the primordial ones. But then something went wrong, allegedly, in all the stories. And what went wrong was us, actually. Rather, there's this cruel break in the narrative suggesting that in order to create the cosmos or to give rise to the human race, these divine ancestors had to impose certain limits, what we call finitude, laws of time, space, body, being. And this made them themselves obsolete by necessity as well, which means that they went extinct from the apparent world. And so this constraint, like that we're faced with, like the fact that we experience pain and death, which the divine ancestors didn't. By the way, that's often explicitly represented in festivals by the time period right before, where people usually go through agonizing rituals of fasting and silence before the festival's inception. But it's also represented by the restoration of social order afterward. So that means that you must first pay an entry fee of willed suffering for this ticket to the perfect world show. And then you also have to accept being exiled from the theater again once the curtain closes on the festival. So now let's attempt our first futuristic turn. What if instead of a reenactment of the first days of the universe, the festival became something of a futuristic motion towards the universe's last days? That's a question I want to ask. What if instead of worshiping the ghostly ancestors, it became a tribute to the ghostly descendants? No longer the ceremonial glorification of the founders, but rather a recognition of the distant offshoot, the progeny, the successor, or the unforeseen visitor who will undo our broken era. And that raises a captivating distinction that I want to make about ghosts, because there are many million kinds of ghosts, as many ghosts as are related to as many deaths as can take place, right? Dying by burning is not the same as dying by freezing or by poison or by blade. And so different ghost trajectories can also come from those different catastrophic events. But there are two kinds of ghosts definitionally as well, which is that the predominant formulation, our basic thinking, is that they're always related to ourselves by heredity or history or time, or at least by species, right? That they were once human. But what if the future festival fastened its gaze to inexistent categories, the alien, the monstrous, or at least the radically foreign, meaning a ghost who approached us with total indifference, total disconnect, and total estrangement? Could we have a festival for the arriving ghost of the stranger? That's my first sort of question to us. Now, the second principle that we can move on to of a festival is that festivals conventionally allow for temporary role switching, right? If you read Borges's Lottery in Babylon, you see this played out as well, where every night you can become a different figure and all that. Masquerades, costumes, disguises, these are all emblems of an interval when actors are no longer discrete, that's what D-I-S-C-R-E-T-E, meaning individually separate, nor discrete, with two E's, meaning cautious or guarded. Rather, people in the festival are entangled, they're flagrant, they're unregulated, and they do these pantomimes of otherness. So in reality, everyday social reality, people have their horoscopes and they have their kinship ties that usually give them these very stratified fates. But here they blend into an anarchistic outpouring, which is actually fascinating to me because it's carried forward by gestures over identity. So gestures like flailing, undulating, bowing, shrieking are more important than identity in the festival. And the festival also, therefore, allows a philosophy of what we can call enticement to cross, to commingle, and trade across existential lines. This is what Calwa is describing here. So we'll read the quote now. He says, actors imitate the heroic deeds and gestures. They wear masks that identify them with this ancestor, half man and half animal. Often these accessories are equipped with shutters that at the desired moment suddenly reveal a second face, thus allowing the wearer to reproduce the instantaneous transformations that took place in the first age. It is in fact important to conjure up the active presence of the beings from the creative period, who alone have the magic quality that can confer the desired efficacy upon the right. So let's, again, think about a future festival, where this ephemeral game of musical chairs doesn't have to culminate with a restoration to your prior subjectivity. Right? Can we imagine a future festival where one would not have to go back to the way things were before, but rather stay in the play acting period of the meanwhile? If we could just maintain this posture of the feigning one forever, the pretender, it would make us an ideal runaway. And you have to consider, and the reason I say that is you have to consider this really important historical dilemma of carnivals and of circuses throughout time, which is that very few watchers, truly rare statistical, ever actually ran away with the carnival or ran away with the circus. You know, instead they would just vicariously go beneath the tents for a spell and then go back to life. You know, and so we want to kind of try and see if there's a future prototype that would stop that that pendulum swing. And if not the runaway, at least can we think about a shapeshifter who follows one rule, which is that once you've expended a form of existence, once you've indulged it, you can never resume it again. So that would almost be like a game of cards where once a certain card is played, I'm talking about identity here though, where once a certain card is played, it becomes banned from the game altogether, right? And this is the question for futurism. Does this self-abandonment become easier in our futuristic age of the network, as opposed to the older era of the festival's orgy? So if we take those two paradigms, the orgy, which is about entanglement and undifferentiation, and the network, which is our new technical version of that, is this even a kind of upgraded version, which would allow, through avatars and profiles that are streaming everywhere, would allow us to obsolesce our roles sort of more easily and more fluidly? So that would be the second principle. Third principle, taboo dissolution. So festivals are always predicated upon a relinquishment of taboo, right? When taboo is usually defined as a forbidden object or forbidden act. This is where Calwa, you can tell, really enjoys his theory of the festival, because his very first page detours into this zone of fever where taboos are thrown away. Opening paragraph of the piece itself, in fact, is full of these energetic concepts where he uses terms like exhilaration, conglomeration, contagion, exaltation, exhaustion, cheer, excess, disguise, and audacity. He also gives details about objects that are smeared with transgressive substances, blood, for instance, or behaviors that are marked by transgressive intent, certain types of movement, though in festival times, these are no longer even perceived as violations. Now that's really important because it means that they escape the very logic of transgression during the festival. Meaning it's not about violating the law, it's about superseding the transgressive logic of good and evil, purity and sin, sacred and profane, law and criminality, through this kind of amazing gesture of forgetting altogether. So let's read a passage from the text here and see what Calwa says about taboo. The festival ends voluntarily in a frenetic and orgiastic way, with nocturnal debauchery involving noise and movement, while the crudest instruments are beaten as a rhythmic accompaniment to the dance. According to the description of an observer, the human mass, swarming, undulating, and stamping the ground, pivots and sways about a center pole. The movement increases as a result of many stimuli. It is augmented and intensified by whatever enhances it: the clash of spears on shields, guttural chants of a rhythmic nature, the jerking and promiscuity of the dance. Violence erupts spontaneously. From time to time, quarrels break out. The combatants are separated, lifted up by strong arms, and rocked rhythmically until calmed. The dance is not interrupted. All right, so if the festival is where these moral bifurcations wither away, if the festival is, we can call it the ecstasy of discordance itself, right? And it's meant to bring in these time slots of cyclical defilement. Remember that the festival is cyclical, and you're supposed to defile yourself. Then what's our futuristic? Well, first of all, ancient hedonism almost always entails some element of the garden, which is to say a prohibition, thou shalt not, that then turns momentarily available. But can we picture a future festival wherein hedonistic experience is no longer designated at a certain time or with a scheduled closure? That's the first. Also, does our obsession with instantaneity in today's culture, instantaneous, we want everything instantly, does that lead to a more spontaneous, fluid, or flash-like channel of desire where taboo could circulate in constant aftershocks and tremors? Right? Beyond that, this is a weird question, would artificial intelligence take those carnal habits of eating, drinking, and singing and transpose them into the domain of thought, which would make the mind itself a stimulant where you could go on a hallucinatory trip with the single touch of a button or coding of a digit? Right? And that's an interesting question for us to ask, which is what would ritualistic waste, because this secret society was interested in waste, which is always linked to ghosts and death as well. What would ritualistic waste look like in the night of virtual consciousness? That's that. Now, actually, I want to share with all of you, as a quick detour before we get to the fourth principle, a few weird side notes, just because I like to give strange trivia from time to time. So since festivals and ghostliness is always linked to the question of atmosphere, right? That ghosts are part of a certain mood, a certain atmosphere. I wanted to make a connection between the ancient and futuristic societies in terms of spatial climate as well. Many of you may know this, that archaeologists hypothesize that those Paleolithic groups who created the first cave paintings might have experienced hallucinations caused by oxygen deprivation, which is called hypoxia, due to the enclosed settings. Now, that's not to negate or diminish or reduce their extreme creativity, elegance, complexity to just being high. But it is an interesting phenomenological detail, you know, that they may have had this sort of oxygen deprivation that led to hallucinations. Interestingly, the reason I bring that up is those are the same conditions that are known to occur for astronauts, where states of altered consciousness, euphoria, and out-of-body sensations can occur in the farther reaches of outer space. So it's an interesting question of whether the future festival also would experiment with cutting off respiratory flows in that way, since it seems like we've come full circle from the cave to outer space. Here's a second side note. Festivals and ghosts have an interesting conceptual link to children, right? Children are often the ones who see monsters under the bed or in the closet, and they also see ghostly things. They also talk with the dead more than adults tend to. Adults do it in mediated and symbolic ways, children more directly. So since festivals are kind of childlike pretending themselves, I wanted to make a further weird connection to the child's imagination. Here's something a lot of people don't know. The earliest psychoanalysts, around the same time as Roger Calois's Secret Society, they discovered that young children demonstrated problems in solving what are called counterfactual syllogisms. So this is really easy. This just means that when you went to a 5-year-old and you confronted them with a 3-part logical sequence, where the first sentence was a totally unrealistic premise. So you told them, all wolves fly. Sebastian is a wolf. Does Sebastian fly? The infants would object and cry out against the initial assumption that wolves are capable of flight. Right? That was always their reaction almost 100% of the time. Whereas older educated children easily recognized it as a test of abstract logic, and thus they overlooked the irrational terms. Nevertheless, the most fascinating aspect of the research was that the young children would entertain the impractical or nonsensical dimension of wolves flying, as long as it was introduced to them in a sing-song voice or playful tone. So is this the same function as the festival? Does the musicality and the frivolity and the tonations of the light tonations of the festival guide people to be capable of accepting or even living by counterfactual syllogisms. In futuristic terms, and this has something to do with the futurism as well, in futuristic terms is all the crazy gamification that we are observing in almost all dimensions of our current society, right? The most disruptive technologies are being marketed to us as games. Social bonding has turned into a weird form of swipe play in online relationships. Speculative economies and cryptocurrencies are based almost entirely on abstract number games. And even politics is becoming more like a sports spectacle where fans and partisans cheer in the arena, right? So with all this gamification, is that going to lead to us being capable of mad counterfactual exercises of logic too? Because if we can accept that, that's when we can start talking to the dead and seeing ghosts again. So, third side note, real fast, and I want to consider. Calwa, in his piece Theory of the Festival, he's really interested in the primordial, and that's often, again, where we place the ghostly. But we might ask what the future, and he's part of a secret society, but we have to ask what the future of secrecy itself might be, because ghosts are part of secrecy. And of course, all of you know that the modern age is hell-bent on destroying secrecy and instead ushering in an age of total transparency, and even I would call it totalitarian transparency, right? So we have to ask ourselves, will there still be winding alleyways, secluded corners, or undergrounds to speak of? Will there even be darkness in our age of simulations and artificial light? Because if there's no darkness, there's no ghostliness to some extent, right? Because they have to disappear into something. That's what makes them powerful. Not just their apparitionality is not just that they appear, it's that they disappear, right? Will there be any tolerance left for puzzles, riddles, rogue tongues, mystification in an age of constant surveillance and transparency, where every impulse has to be thrown into the spectacle of media, public media? Will there still be ways of carving out hidden or subterranean dreams of shadows? Ghosts, as I just said, are associated with darkness, and darkness has often been synonymous with concepts of individuality, privacy, future, and freedom. And in light of the incredible velocity, this is another problem too, is that ghosts entertain a kind of middle ground between all sorts of things, an undecidable middle ground between the living and the non-living, present and the absent, the known and the unknown. And we're in an age right now where with incredible velocity, the unknown becomes known, right? Almost instantaneously. And eventually it's going to supersede even the speed of thought or light. And this is why kind of all experiences in culture today they snap their neck into a kind of automatic deja vu. The second of their inception, they're already exhausted at some level. That's part of the disenchantment of our age as well. But so what new formulations of secret societies, since secret societies were the first ones to try and talk to ghosts, to converse with them, to resurrect the dead, what new forms of secret societies will have to be conceived in order to contend with such accelerated realities? And it may be that they actually don't go towards ancient cosmologies. It might be that these groups, these secret societies, will have to partake increasingly of informational technologies and try to achieve a kind of digital spectrality. Will they, we could even imagine forming groups of like hacker monks who, in order to stay, 5 steps ahead of the gauntlet of reality and protect the very possibility of the ghost, they have to become more artificial than ever before. So moving forward, the fourth principle, revitalization. The festival is always supposed to be a recovery of the world's genesis story for the sake of rejuvenation. And it's in this vein that Calwa writes this quote. So let's read it together. Simultaneously nightmare and paradise, the primordial age seems like the period or the state of creative vigor from which the present world escaped, with its vicissitudes of wear and tear and the threat of death. Consequently, it is by being reborn, by reinvigorating himself in this ever-present eternity, as in a fountain of youth with continuously running water, in which he has the chance to rejuvenate himself and to discover the plenitude and robustness of life, that the celebrant will be able to brave a new cycle of time. This is the function fulfilled by the festival. And I think it's awesome that obviously we have all these futuristic debates about the immortality threshold right now. Whether we'll achieve medical and genetic immortality within the next decades, it is a viable potentiality. But it also has a mythical precedent in these ancient civilizations that had all sorts of storytelling about fountains of youths and immortal beings, right? And that's ghosts and the dead have played into that as well, throughout history. So again, just to do the gesture we've been doing, what if we tampered with the semiotics, the optics, the symbologies of the festival to produce an end world alternative of those preemptively exiting life? So on the one hand, what if the future feast, if we all attended a future feast, what if there was no dialectical counterpart of a waiting standardized reality that would take over again, but rather we all just kept devouring in this sort of state of devouring and simulation, or rather even devouring the simulation itself? That's a weird concept, but if you think of the fact that reality was often depicted by ancient civilizations as a stomach, the universe was the stomach usually of a woman in some celestial sense and all of that, and that we exist in her belly, right, or in her intestines. And this secret society of Kalwa was obsessed with intestines. If anybody knows the monster they worshipped, Batai and him and the others, that had cut out its own heart, cut off its own head, and left only the labyrinth of the belly, sort of, to remain. Anyway, it's an interesting thing to think about devouring reality itself. But again, if you go back, there's always, and I don't call them metaphors, these images are powerful embodiments and actualizations of the world that the ancients had, of thinking of it as a stomach or as a jaw. Often time was described as a jaw, right? That was swallowing things whole. So anyway, what if the future festival was given an apocalyptic capacity? That's basically what I'm asking. That could set fire to creation at its collective climax. This occasion would have its own phantasmatic aspect, not linked to the dead ancestors anymore, but rather to the dying last specimen of our race, those not yet even born, but already exiting the world stage, envisioning their disappearance from afar, if the festival could attain fatalistic proportions. And it reminds me of something once that Maurice Blanchot said, and that's an interesting figure to bring up here, because Blanchot was friends with all these members of the Acephalic Secret Society, Kalwan Batai, but he didn't join. He had disappeared kind of from the world in his own ghostly way, moved down to South France and sort of became antisocial. But he said something very enigmatic and beautiful once. He said that there were times when he was writing, Blanchot said, where his right hand would take on an unstoppable momentum. And it would start to operate almost under its own will, its own volition, and produce this frightful content that he didn't recognize as his own. And he said basically in that state of trance, he had only one recourse, only one gesture or solution. He couldn't tell the right hand what to write. He could only bring the left hand to stop the right hand. And so we talked about revitalization, rejuvenation, but could the future festival be conceived along the same axis as a left-handed event that would stop the world from turning? And what intrigues me about that prospect is that it wouldn't resurrect us as ancient ghosts, but rather as something beyond even the vampire or zombie classifications of the undead or the living dead. So what I'm after here is an event that would use the future to simultaneously be an eternal return and a point of no return. That would be a cool paradox to achieve if we could ever get that. Lastly, these are just some supplements here that intrigue me. Ghosts are never talked about in this way, but I've linked them, and I personally, when I've written on them recently, have thought about how they're linked to the faculty of what's called paradolia. And paradolia is when you impose an alternative image on a visual stimulus. That's like children who see animal shapes in the clouds, right? Or faces on the moon's surface, right? And this is different from what's called apophenia. Apophenia is a condition among schizophrenics often who they see elaborate patterns, numbers, messages in otherwise unrelated things. But that's a little less interesting to me, to be quite honest, because that still is about meaning, about uncovering meaning. Whereas the child's pareidolia, or that state of pareidolia and the festival, are not about meaning, but about imagination. So seeing ghosts or seeing the dead too are kind of like the Rorschach ink blot tests of the psychoanalysts in that regard, or even better than the psychoanalysts, what are called the Mimeotolithic Patterns. Those were the eroded rocks that ancient shamans believed that they saw the profiles of their dead ancestors. So they would walk through the valleys of stone and see these strange etchings caused by erosion, geological transformations over the time. And if there was even the slightest resemblance, they would project the visual image of an ancestor. But what I love about it is that most often they didn't have a name or a narrative to associate. They just associated it as a force. And there's actually a beautiful literary work that complements this by a North African tribal writer, Ibrahim Al-Koni, who's one of my favorites. He has a book called The Bleeding of the Stone. And in it, there's this nomadic tribe, which he's actually from, the Tuareg tribe, North Africa. And he's a brilliant figure. He went and I think did a PhD in philosophy in France and then went back to his nomadic tribe and became a writer for the rest of his life. A fascinating and complex thinker. He writes in The Bleeding of the Stone about an ancient valley where there are these old statues that are colossal, massive, just immense, stretching to the sky. And they have nothing to do with the belief system or the historical narratives of the tribe. They have no idea, his people have no idea where they come from. They have no idea what they mean or what they signify in the universe or nothing remains of them but these emblems. And every generation they select one member of the tribe. And in this case, a young man who's the narrator of the story, to go and live his entire life in solitude, protecting those ancient idols, those ancient sculptures, even though there are no answers or explanations or meaning associated with them. They just recognize them as sacred forms that deserve some type of guarding. And so he becomes the guardian of them. And it's really cool because what eventually happens in this absolute solitude where he's visited by almost no one for decades, every day he has this ritual of climbing, especially this one that he's the most fascinated by, which is called the masked jinni. And he climbs this massive thing. He rappels sort of with a rope to get to the face, and he polishes the face in a kind of beautiful caretaker's gesture. And he starts to talk, and he starts to devise all kinds of elaborate storytelling possibilities, but they change constantly because they're not part of a tradition. They're just part of his own avant-garde kind of speculation. So that's something that I was thinking of that we could also project towards the world of ghosts and the dead, is if we went back to this faculty, this childish faculty of Paradolia, of applying visual images to other things, seeing things in other things. Also, I'm interested always in hysterical strength and hysterical doubt. I won't talk about that much, but ghosts have historically been associated with hysteria. Ghost sighting, and particularly when there are mass sightings of ghosts or mass sightings of the dead, it's called definitionally mass hysteria, right? But what's cool about hysteria, I don't care about what the psychoanalysts want to sort of dismiss it. What's cool about it is that hysteria is actually known for a syndrome called hysterical strength. That's like when a mother sees her child underneath a car trapped and being killed and is able to lift the car. This has been documented empirically on countless occasions, that they summon this adrenaline rush and this extraordinary strength, musculature strength that has to do with twitch, fast twitch and slow twitch musculature, and really lift like 20 times more than they ever would be normally able to in a single instant. And it's not otherworldly or miraculous necessarily. It's very much just a summoning of physical capacity, but it happens in states of hysteria. And there's another thing too, and the festival also has a lot of that psychosomatic abilities. If any of you have ever seen mystical festivals, then you'll see documents where pain becomes irrelevant, where they're able to do almost supernatural things, and things of that nature. Hysterical doubt, this is also something really cool too. Doubt for us in everyday society is always a neurotic fixation. So we second guess. But doubt in hysteria is an ecstatic ability. They love overthinking. They love hesitation, indecision. There's a really deep pleasure principle in thinking twice, in vacillating, in being ambivalent. And actually, if you look at festivals, everyone thinks of them as just totally fluid. But there's actually, just like in the carnival where you say, what should we ride first? And then you're torn in different directions. There's actually a lot of stuttering. in the movement and choreographies of festivals as well. You know, it's not all just pure continuity. So anyway, the last thing I wanted to mention is something, here's another just psychological pathology that's really cool with ghostliness and the dead, Cotard's delusion, also known as walking corpse syndrome. It's a very rare condition of hypochondria where certain subjects believe that they are already dead. Another version of Cotard's delusion is that they believe that their blood has been drained or that their organs have been harvested and taken from them, stolen from them. And this is there's a physiological explanation of how this happens, which is that they speculate it's caused by neural misfiring in the fusiform area of the brain, all that, but really that they haven't confirmed it. It's just a cool kind of pathology. But there's one other one that it's linked to that I want to talk about. It's often linked to the second one, which is called Capgras delusion. And Capgras delusion is particularly about the misrecognition of faces. It's where someone cannot recognize other people's faces, nor even their own in the mirror. And what that results in is a conspiracy theory, a paranoid conspiracy theory, usually, that everybody is an imposter and that people have been inhabited or possessed by foreign or outsider beings, by ghosts, by the dead, including themselves, which is a fascinating prospect to consider. So anyway, all of this comes down to this concluding point, which I wanted to raise, all three of these, whether it's Paradolia and Epiphania, whether it's hysteria, or whether it's these Cotard and Capgras delusions about thinking you're already dead or that you're inhabited by the dead, which is that basically it just hones our sense, sharpens our senses to mistrust the most fundamental assumption of reality, which is that anything is as it seems. And I actually think that's an absolutely necessary first step of consciousness. Do not trust that things are what they seem. It's what every fairy tale teaches us, and it's what philosophy taught us thousands of years ago. So anyway, thank you everyone for that. And I'm happy to answer any questions or.
Sure, thank you, Jason. I think I was like blown away at the end with all of these postulations and problems that you put around ghosts and these delusions. Actually, before I postulate my question, because I was thinking a lot about something I was rereading recently. Santiago, who was part of Otros Presentes, wanted to ask the following, and it's how we can find the existence of certain practices that can intensify, as you say, the relationship with ghosts, as you mentioned, festivals, rituals, secret societies. And in this sense, he says that we know that there's like this this very fundamental link between magic and art. So which elements do you think are key to think art as a spectral interface? What ideas do you think we can give to, let's say, in the sense of political potency, to the relationship between art, specters, and politics?
Okay, great question. So first, I would say this, that I give Freud absolute credit as a formative genius, because he's one of the first people to talk about ghost sightings in a really intellectual way. Of course, he ends up trying to come up with a theory that harmonizes and unifies, his worldview. But nevertheless, he takes it quite serious. Not as an actual event. He doesn't believe that it's a magical event. He believes that it's a projection of the unconscious. But nevertheless, what he signifies for us is that ghosts tend to appear in moments of despair or moments of emergency, right? In settings of extreme violence where the stakes are life and death. If you think of when Hamlet sees his father's ghost, right? It's in a time of murder. It's in a time of extreme sort of cataclysm and transformation. And so what troubles me about art or philosophy's relationship to the spectral world right now is that we play for very low stakes existentially. I mean, we're not being threatened with death, imprisonment, execution, martyrdom, extreme censorship. We're just in this kind of malaise of indifference and oversaturation, and everyone is writing poetry and everyone's doing theory and everybody's making art. And it becomes so disillusioned to a great extent, disillusioned that the illusional power of the ghost becomes impossible. Why do you, think about this. Let me give you a great example of this as an answer to the question. It is commonly known that often when mountain climbers are climbing some of the most difficult and treacherous mountains in the world, and they get to a point of vertigo where they lose the path. They don't know up from down anymore. They don't know how to go forward. Oftentimes they will tell that at that precise moment, they meet another climber who is crossing them on the path. And this climber tells them to calm down and that they know the way and that they will guide them to the top. And this person accompanies them all the way to the top. And in that moment of euphoria and of rapture, when you reach the top and you're staring out and you look back in pride to tell them, look at this, they're not there anymore. It's a figment, it's a hallucination. It's an intention, it's a ghost sighting of this tells us we have the capacity to summon ghosts sort of spontaneously in moments of extreme despair, right, or desperation as a last resort. That is not, again, supernatural. That's psychosomatic and existential, and it's a very powerful faculty that we should devote more study and more time to, especially since we do it all the time anyway. When you're in crisis or in doubt or confusion, you talk to yourself. But who are you talking to? Not really yourself, but a better version of yourself who tells you, all right, calm down, stay calm, think it through. You've got this. Don't worry about it. Let's think. Let's organize our thoughts. Who is this elder figure, this overseer, this guide? It's a wiser, more cunning, more sensitive version than yourself, which tells us we have the capacity to split our personalities into superior versions of ourselves. We can call that the ghost. Right? But for that to happen, we have to feel in danger. We have to feel under siege. We have to feel like we're at the threshold of collapse. We can't be in a nice sugar cube art gallery with wine tastings, and people just roaming around meditatively looking at the walls. And I'm not making an apology for authoritarian societies where you have to run from secret police all the time, but I do a lot of research in those societies. And I know that you have more of a chance of seeing a ghost when you have to run for your life, or when you're put in a dungeon than you do when it's just too easy and kind of a free ride. So I would say that's the first thing, is that we don't need to. Nietzsche has a beautiful line. He says, in peace times, a warlike person goes to war with themselves, which means I'm not saying we need some horrific totalitarian overlord to make us feel, intimidated so that we can see ghosts. We can put more pressure on ourselves. And I think we need to, in order to have those experiences. So that would be my first major step.
Thank you, Jason. Wonderful, wonderful response. I just, like, before handing out the mic to the audience, I just was thinking a lot of something when you talked about at the beginning about festivals and carnivals and the dissolution or the annihilation of subjectivity, where we can no longer differentiate between, let's say, good or bad drives. I was thinking a lot of how this also plays what you said about secrecy, and how actually this kind of naked stupidity where we are located at currently via this orgiastic networking we are currently living in. How this is important in something that, for example, Lyotard says in Libidinal Economy, and there's like this quote that really shocks me and relates to what you were saying, where he says that there are only surfaces, conspiracy and secrecy reign, which was like a quote I read yesterday once again. I was like, wow, like nice. This relates to something that you were saying right now, that whenever we take something as a surface or a naked stupidity, there's like no way of dissimulating or going against this differentiation between a good or a bad drive. And it seems like necessary to go back again into secrecy to make the annihilation of self possible. So I just wanted to like make this observation, because I think it's like really on point. Like, we need to find a way to be less naked in a stupid sense, probably,
Mm-hmm.
and be
Mm-hmm.
more, once again, be traded against into secrets, into the occult, not revealing oneself to the ones who differentiate what's bad or what's good. Or let's say if you're like talking in a political sense, like if you want to go against the state, or if you want to disarticulate the state, you first need to go into secrecy. You have to
Mm-hmm.
go into the shadows. You have to disappear in a certain sense, so
Mm-hmm.
your traces are no longer seen. And it's something that I think we've lost as a society, you know.
Absolutely, absolutely. I would say this to that too, that I don't think that it's sufficient, and that's why I like that Calwa takes a step in a direction that maybe even went beyond Bataille in some regards. That it's not about doing evil things or immoral things. You know, why are children and fools, you know, idiots and mad people feared most? It's not that they're going to do what's wrong. It's that they're going to do something that's never been seen before, which is an absurd third gesture that isn't even in some dialectical category of, you know, of the grotesque. Sometimes you see it with kids. They'll do some weird choreography, weird movements, you know, and all of that that are awkward, like Buto dancing, you know, in the Japanese sort of avant-garde and all that. It's not clearly evil or immoral. You know, it's only inappropriate because we don't know what to do with it. You just kind of have to sit and watch it or let it unfold. And I think we need to perfect those gestures, because one of the other facets of what you described, Federico, very eloquently about modern societies and their regimes is that they have totally monopolized the domain of shock value, right? Tarantino is not, you know, the old avant-garde, but there's nowhere left to go really in those realms of obvious violence or of graphic or flagrant eroticism. I mean, we've saturated, you know, sort of those possibilities and all that. So what needs to be done is more inventive, again, unenvisioned and unforeseen possibilities. There's still a lot on the landscape of human experience. It's just that it requires, and by the way, this happened in the avant-garde as well. There were avant-garde artists, and I'm talking about the surrealists, the futurists, the Dadaists, the minimalists, you know, that time period, same time period of Roger Calois, who were clearly just trying to be gross or be disturbing, but in very conventionally oppositional and subversive ways. And then there were others who just gave you the what the hell is that? And that experience of awe is actually the true experience of the ghost, is that this can't be happening, but it's happening. It's almost impossibility embodied. And the face of the ghost is something that should be somewhat unreadable, you know? Not purely hideous, nor purely. That's why, actually, if we go back even to great East European folkloric traditions of monsters like vampire stories, you read the Transylvanian vampire stories, the original ones, and they are neither beautiful nor grotesque. They're a third option, and that makes them irresistible. And ancient tribes, I've said this in other places, it's not to be politically incorrect, it's a historical fact. They often worshipped albinos, people with, you know, pigment discoloration, or what we would call defects or deficiencies today, but which were exoticized as, you know, sort of miraculous signals or signs of having been touched by, you know, beyond powers and divine powers and all of that. And it's the exact opposite of this tyrannical aesthetic sameness of the Kardashian kind of form, you know, the plastic surgical uniformity that now becomes the paradigm of beauty. If you look back at the ancient Egyptians and the ancient Babylonians, their gods look nothing like them. I think that is the most crucial decision ever made in history. And even the Greeks, who betrayed that by anthropomorphizing their pantheon eventually. But their original gods, their titans, are monstrous. They are inhuman to the maximum degree. And I think it's a beautiful aspect of those ancient cultures that they worshiped things that did not resemble. And that's an entry point into the ghostly and the dead as well. So anyway.
Thank you, Jason, for your answer. I'm just gonna make the invitation in Spanish as well. Like, si alguien tiene una pregunta o quieren como intervenir, pueden hacerlo sin ningún problema, abrir el micrófono o en el chat. Y si tienen problemas como hablar en inglés o algo, yo también puedo traducir a Jason para que les pueda responder las preguntas. Entonces, pues no sé si alguien se anime como... and in English, if somebody is here from, like, speaks English, is a native speaker, if you want to take the mic and ask Jason something, please go ahead.
Debo tener confianza en su traducción.
I'll try.
Go ahead.
I'll try not to distort it.
Okay.
So we have two questions on the sidebar.
Ana Luisa has asked something there, if you see that.
Yeah. She says, I'm trying to understand this idea of Derrida, that in order to finally learn to live, we must be with specters and talk to them. Is it possible for you to say something about this claim? Thanks.
Excellent. So I had the privilege of actually taking courses with Derrida when he was writing Spectres of Marx. And so he was very, at that time, focused on. And something that intrigued him about the idea of spectrality, obviously this goes way back. I mean, even Socrates says that philosophy is an ars moriendi. It's an art of death. It's about learning how to die well, right? So we're already haunted to some extent, but there's something very practical and everyday and banal that I'd like to observe before the cool Derridian riddles that come out of it, which is that we are constantly haunted by hypothetical selves that do not manifest. And I've said this in other places, but just on a daily basis, you make the most micro minimalist decisions that would alter, obviously, your trajectory in 1,000 ways. If you just woke up 5 minutes later, your day might be entirely different than it was before. If you went left instead of right, you know, if you called someone on the phone, for just things that, I mean, could be as flagrant and massive as a death that you avoided, or it could be, or some wonderful possibility. You would have gotten to the train 3 minutes earlier and met the love of your life and become infatuated, and you would have had 3 children, and they've just disappeared in an instant because you hesitated in locking the door, you know, for a few seconds. We are haunted continually by these specters of potential selves, hypothetical selves that never had the ability to surface or materialize. And we actually have a term for this philosophically when we become conscious of them, which is regret. Regret is precisely that moment when you realize there were 1,000 crossroads, junctures, where you could have chosen otherwise. And there were other selves and identities that could have emerged, and they've died. You know, they died before they even lived. The question for us is, how do we contend with them? How do we engage with those figures? Do we just ignore them the way that we try in the modern age to ignore dreams as well and just banish them to the realms of irrelevance? Or do we have to, and this is a question for Derrida, do we have to mourn them in some way? Or do we have to account for them? Do we owe them a debt? These are Derridian terms that I don't always operate by, but since the question by Ana Luisa was about Derrida's perspective, I would say that's an important thing. And he was also at the same time very interested in questions of the message. So he wrote a book called Postcard, I believe it was called, or The Postcard of Death, something to that effect, where he was interested in how messages are conveyed, you know, and we talk about this in theology through prayer. So if we can understand another type of transcendent communication or ethereal communication or apparitional communication, he was also interested in what it would mean to write a letter to the specter or to the ghost. There's a lot then. To live among them, what that would mean existentially might become being hyper conscious of all of the lost and forsaken possibilities that accompany every single gesture and movement. But that could also drive you insane, because this is not even way before Derrida, existentialists ask this very basic question, which is, who said you were born at the right time of history? Who says you were even thrown into the right body? You know, and for those who have some idealistic kind of narcissistic idea of destiny, like, no, this is what, tell that to the 25,000 African children who will starve this way. That no, you existed at the right, everyone exists in the right time for their destiny. No, it's very clear that tons of minorities and women and the colonized and 1,000 other parties throughout history existed at the wrong time and in the wrong bodies in under circumstances that crushed any potentiality for them to fulfill themselves. It's only very entitled winners of the historical game who think in those silly terms of fate, right? So we start from this question, this premise of maybe the best time for me would have been 100 years ago, or 100 years from now, or 1,000 years from now, maybe in a different place, right? Maybe with a different language, maybe with a different look and a different body. People who are terminally ill experience this sense of radical, intimate betrayal by their own bodies. They become conscious that they're not born in the right body when it's snatched from them, when life is snatched from them by some stupid defective organ that goes wrong and then collapses the totality of their organism. So I would say, yeah, it's to become conscious, but not to the point of neurosis. You see, I'll just say this one last thing, Annalisa, which is something that Derrida would be intrigued by as well to some extent, which is that if I were to show you a mirror, a looking glass of your day, and to tell you that I can show you all the places that had you done X or Y or Z, it would have flung you in a completely different compartment. And you turn around and say, well, look, so then did I live the ideal? The probability, the sheer chances that you lived the ideal day according to your desires is almost none, almost zero, that you got it perfectly right. There are just too many variables and contingencies, right? So if you were to say, oh my God, I totally missed the greatest occasion and possibility that would have happened, my big break, some great fortune that would have occurred. And then you say, but it's okay, you know, now that I know that person X that I could have met always takes a walk on Wednesday, you know, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I just have to replicate it. And I'll go there next Wednesday and I'll do it. And here's the problem that you discover. It doesn't happen again. Meaning they'll be there, but you try to replay the conversation identically and something's different. It's raining now, or they had a bad conversation in the morning or something, and it doesn't click this time. You can't get it back. That experience is that of the spectrum. When you realize that there are things which are irreversible. I think that's something that Derrida would also say about learning to live with that. It's like children, when storytellers finish a book and tell them the end, and they have to realize that it's the end, and they can't do anything about it. They can't save their favorite character if they die. They can't rewrite the story. They just have to endure. That's living with specters. Thank you for a great question.
Wonderful, Jason. Thank you. No sé si alguien más quiera preguntar algo a Jason por el micrófono o por el chat. If not, or in the meantime, there's also like this last question that we have from Santiago, and it's this one. It's through our cycle, we have seen bets to think spectral agency from the point of view that enjoys, in a certain sense, an autonomous existence beyond conscience. Do you think that from your point of view, is it possible to think about a pure ontological exteriority, or how can this ontological status be thought if that's the case?
Okay, so wow. Yeah, thanks for throwing the hard one at me towards the end. Sure. I would say this, you know, this is something that also gets completely overlooked, that for me is a legacy of existentialist thinkers like Nietzsche that I can't believe now people are acting like they've superseded it or it's a cliche. It's just, to me, an absolute, I was almost going to say the terrible word truth, but it's almost an absolute truth to me that 99% of all of our thoughts come from the outside. Right? And this I say with absolute humility as a writer and a thinker who is deeply suspicious of every thought not being a unique, spontaneous act of my own volition and my own inner experience, but instead coming from things that I've heard, I've never been to China, but I've been told there's a China and every city in it. Well, where do I get that from? I get that from the outside, right? Others have told me, family members, teachers, books, the news. There's 1,000 things working on us. We're not on an island in some solitary vacuum of consciousness, right? We're bombarded continually to the extent that it is hard to know where we begin and it ends, right? And this is what Heidegger even called the they, you know, the voice of the they. It sounds like your voice in your head when you're talking to yourself, but can you really trust that's your voice? Now, I think that part of the great work of artists and philosophers and writers and creative types of musicians is that they have to try and figure out a method, even if it's a delusional one, of how to differentiate what they could maybe call their thoughts. And that doesn't mean it pre-exists in some inner child, eternal, authentic thing. No, you built it. You artificially constructed it in the abyss after you realized that, my God, they built me from the ground up, from point zero. They named me, imprinted me, tattooed me, you know, with their ways, their theologies, their rituals, their habits, their customs, their cultures, their sexualities, their social, you know, rights and all that. They owned me from day one. There never was a me, an I, before a they. When you have that earth-shattering break of humility, which for me came from Nietzsche, returning, you go, you don't really exist, not yet. You've got to work excruciatingly hard to even salvage, maybe to devise even one fugitive thought that you might say, I don't think they had much to do with that. You know, I don't think they whispered that into my ear or conditioned that into me. Maybe, of course, it's developed from all these circumstances and forces you can't fully separate. But then there is something, some ingenuity, some form of will, some form of cool artistry and improvisation that allows you to think a thought that should not have belonged, that should not have existed. We can call that a ghostly thought, even to a great extent. So this question of the outside begins with that, a recognition that the outside has already reigned over you, sort of in the most dominant ways. Now, if we take this is an important thing. Recent scientists have been working on, in Germany, of course, of all places, they've been working on a microchip in the brain that allows mice to be, with a joystick, like a video game joystick, to be manipulated to go left, right, forward, or whatever. And of course, they're starting human trials, right? To see whether or not they could manipulate a human being walking down a street in New York City to go left or right, right? Now, that's not the interesting point. Of course, they'll achieve that, and of course, let them achieve it. You know, but here's the problematic. The question is, when you are being controlled by the doctors in the laboratory from a distance, right, to turn left on the street, will you experience that as a terrifying coercion and domination of these overseers behind the curtain, or will you experience it as free will? The scary proposition is that you will experience it as free will. They've already determined. So this is an issue with artificial intelligence as well that we have to contend, right? Is that this outside that then moves inside, once it gets infused, once we're plugged in, where that boundary and that distinction, you know, blurs is almost beyond perception at this point. And by the way, there is a name, a classical psychological name for the disappearance of the boundary between the interior and the exterior world. It's called schizophrenia. And that's why the schizophrenic is always trying to externalize their thoughts and talk to you in the street and tell you they purge and they fling and they project, right? They also, I said this in a million places, they're known symptomatically for believing they shoot light and rays from their body, which are like prophets with their halos. I'm not saying the prophets were schizophrenic. I'm just suggesting it might have been a nice coincidence that, you know, their halos sort of surround them, because that's a schizophrenic condition. It's about externalization often. So here's the thing, is that are we seeing more and more schizophrenic episodes and breakdowns in society at epidemic levels? In the United States, in particular, where I come from. The sad thing is that it's a condition which historically was not prone to violence, which is now completely becoming part of the matrix of violence, less because of schizophrenia itself and more because of the way that it is mistreated by society and by reality. So I would just say, yeah, the outside is a wonderful concept. It has its enchanting dimensions of it that I partake of as well. I'll give you, since I give you two negative ones, the Germans controlling your mind from the outside, and and also just the fact that our thoughts are imposed on us from the outside to begin with. Let me give you a nice enchanted one, which is that in Algeria, in northern Algeria, there is an old pirate city. And it's a great city where there's all sorts of criminal aesthetics and graffiti and certain music and all sorts of things that have come out of there. But it's basically barricaded in the south from the rest of Algerian society, because these are considered the undesirables, the unwanted, the stigmatized. So it's a space of criminals and gangsters and prostitution and dealers of all kinds. And historically, more than anything, smugglers. So smugglers have come in these and so most people who live in this city of northern Algeria don't stay. They're not citizens. They're not social persona. They're temporary visitors on their way to somewhere else. So it's a weird paradox. On their southern border, they are barricaded by an actual wall that doesn't allow their entrance in the rest of Algerian society. On their northern border, that's the Mediterranean. So they're free to the universe, basically, and the waters, the infinity of the waters. What's so wondrous about actually navigating a place like that is that everybody is there only transient. So everybody's a kind of ghost who's about to vanish from your life, which really enhances the intimacy and power of encounters. Because when you know that that person is treating you like it may, and they also live in a very dangerous space, of illegality. So it may literally be that the night they spend with you is the last night on earth for them. And they treat it that way. It almost has this apocalyptic intimacy of the last night together. But it's done between total strangers, and even better than that, liars. Nobody tells the truth in that city because everyone is doing something they shouldn't be doing. And so you make up names. And there's something very liberating, which goes back to the festival and masquerades. When you don't have the anxiety anymore of, is Federico telling me the truth, or is he lying to me? Or is he just being polite? Or what does he really think? None of that. I know he's lying to me. I know every utterance is a lie. It actually liberates you beautifully in a space like that. And that's what happens with all experiences of the unreal. That's why we like fantasies. That's why we like dreams, right? And that's why we like the realm of ghosts as well, is that they're not bound by truth. So that would be the great potential of thinking of them as the outside as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason. I don't know if we have like a space for one last question, if that's okay with you.
Of course, of course.
Because David is raising his hand. So please, David.
Oh, thank you. There are some other questions on the chat, but well, I will take advantage, some advantage, because I'm super interested in the theme. Thank you so much for the talk and for this deep analysis about the phenomenon of ghosts. I would like to bring to the conversation the concept of the desiring machines, designed by Deleuze and Guattari on the book of Anti-Oedipus, in which he considers that the machines are not knowable or cognizable devices, but devices that are mediated by affect. In that sense, I am interested in understanding and to extend the question to you about the idea of how the machines are being considered like the device between, or the wire that connects this idea of the unreachable space with the real one. I would like to remain how Deleuze talks about how images, for example, on the cell phones or computers are projected, but they are not the machines itself, but are like spectrums that becomes part of the machine, in which the idea of Paradolia that you mentioned makes a lot of sense in this process, but as well are also like machines that like helps you to make your wishes come true. And for instance, that made me think about the jinns in the Middle Eastern culture and in the Quran, which they are mentioned like are sort of entities that are not ghosts, but they also are like know that no living creatures that makes your wishes come true. So I think these are my my thoughts and my question for you.
For sure, Doug. Let me start from the end and work back, because I have some notes of what you just said. First of all, if you've never read it, and I can send it to Federico, and if he has your information, he can provide it to you. There's a really weird, cool, old anthropological, it's almost a kind of sub-classic anthropological book about a Moroccan man who believed that he had married a jinn. And they actually, this anthropologist lives with him for a while and interviews him, and he watches him perform all these daily preparations of meals and of making her bed and of talking to her, and she's completely, invisible to him, obviously. And it's this really, really strange kind of just everydayness that he exists in, where he believes that he's actually completely married at the most intimate levels. And actually that it's very powerful, because in a patriarchal society, historically at that time, all societies at that time when he's writing are patriarchal and still are for the most part, tragically. But she is actually the one who initiated the marriage and who demanded and kind of almost forced him into wedding vows. And she has a monstrous capacity for rage as well at times. So there are moments when all of a sudden he'll spontaneously burst into like terror and fear that she's going to strike him or devour him. She has the capacity to eat him and then resurrect him, which is really strange. So I would just say, you can ask Federico. I'm happy to give you the name of that text later. But it's a really, really cool one in terms of a person who actually thought that they married. And I bring that up only because that's a very flagrant and literal relationship of desire, right? So when you brought up desiring machines and all of that, and desiring ghosts, there's a guy who actually desired a ghost, or even more interestingly, felt that he was desired by a ghost, right? So there's that. The next thing that I would say, to this question, is that already now we start seeing how machinic technologies are playing at ghostly stakes and ghostly proportions by bringing us forms of kind of digital immortalization of our dead loved ones. So some of you have seen like Black Mirror episodes maybe that are about this, where, but it actually exists as a technology now where they can create a digital clone of your dead partner or dead relative or whomever, based on all kinds of social media information that you provide to them, so they can emulate and replicate the vocal patterns, their typical expressions, and you can kind of have this uneasy, disquieted conversation with them that simulates what they probably would have said and how they probably would have, down to their very gestures. And of course, this is rapidly going to exponentially improve to the point that almost they're going to be identical, if not better, than the real, which is always the promise of simulation, is better than real, right? So that's one thing that will happen. But that, by the way, is not a totally new form of desire. It's just being manipulated technologically by machines better. If you look, oh God, this is controversial, and a lot of you guys are in South America, so I don't mean to offend, but there's a reason why there's a reason why psychologically, perhaps historically, women have been more prone to, in Christianity, towards religiosity. They're the religious glue of the family. And it's that there's a perfect man that you can desire every week in church, who is far superior to your awful husband. He's patient, he's kind to children, he's gentle, he's handsome. You don't think that the church completely manipulates the erotic potential of him half naked on the. That's who's that aimed for? Who is that desiring machine of the? He's always ripped with abdominal muscles and all of that. Yes, he's slender and kind of androgynous a lot of the times, almost in a way. But it's an interesting projection of desire that fills the void of disappointment with patriarchal society and being forced into marriage, oftentimes in historical times, with some stranger that you can think of just the awful fate that so many people suffered in that. So yeah, you have a kind of projection, a ghost that you can love, and it's not a forbidden love. And by the way, the most extreme version of it, nuns even refer to themselves as the wives of Christ, right? That's not, I'm not even sort of experimenting here. They very literally see themselves as wed to Christ, the way the Moroccan man believed he was wed to a jinn. So that's one thing. But yes, these machines that are producing these immortalizations, photography in its inception, not to go off on detours, but all technology has always been haunted. That's not a radical breakthrough on my part to say, which is why some of the very first photographs in the 19th century are of the dead. You guys can go Google Victorian death photography and see that it was a very common practice among both aristocracy and regular people to photograph people as soon as they died in their best clothes, postured on a couch, often infants as well, the elderly and the infant and everyone in between, with the family, with big smiles on their face. And the reason was less that they were morbid or decadent or bizarre, but that they recognized the apparatus of the photograph to be a haunting medium, right? That it's all about ghosts. So the more we just keep on going into these digital screens and these virtual worlds and all of that, the more ghostliness is going to return. There's that expression, ghost in the machine even. But what's interesting about that we can use a Deleuzian text, since you imported Monsieur Deleuze into the conversation. We can use another Deleuzian text to complement his desiring machines theory, which is that if you take repetition and difference, or difference and repetition, I always forget which way it is. But basically, he makes this brilliant insight, which children know from the telephone game, which is that when you try to infinitely replicate a message of any kind or a form of any kind, it gets inevitably distorted. It produces transfigurations, not sameness, right? That's like the copying machines that blur or fade things. But it's also like, again, whispering a message to 40 people in a line, and by the time it gets to the end, it's completely deviated, right? This is going to continue to happen no matter how well the algorithms function. There's always going to be, if not on their side, the temptation to distort, then we will find ways. There will always be the sinister ones among us who will find ways of inserting within infinite reproducibility the turn with a twist. And so I would say that's the desiring machine. We have to have a desire for the machine to not malfunction, but to produce odd conclusions, unanticipated possibilities.
Thank you, Jason. And I don't know, like just one last shot and we can like close it off if that's
Sure,
okay.
Sure.
Because I like this question, and it's by Jonathan. He asks, how can we start to massify the manifestation of all these ghosts that stay dormant in the now, and not only limit ourselves to just a few ghosts, which, let's say, belong to a past which is already anachronic?
So how do we amass them, the manifestation of all these ghosts?
Yes. How can we massify like this strategy of ghosts that go beyond, that are already dormant in the now, but we're not able to see them?
Sure. So there's an interesting thing. You can take a political atrocity, like the parade that's held, I believe it's every year in Buenos Aires for the desaparecidos, right? Where I believe it's the mothers and grandmothers of their fallen children or brothers or sisters in some instances who walk silently through the streets of the capital. At least that's how I remember it being. I don't know if it's changed performatively at this point, but to me, it always was one of the most beautiful ceremonies and a very haunting, quite literally, because these were people who vanished into thin air, often overnight, and who the state refused to speak of. So, there were no files, there was no explanation, there are no trials, there's no visitation rights. What do you mean your son vanished? Oh, he may have run away. Maybe he never even existed. These were the kinds of answers they were given in that weird totalitarian atmosphere where the enemy didn't even, because they were using parastate kind of secretive channels and all of that, didn't even acknowledge the violence. I always thought that's an extremely powerful gesture on their part, and a very elegant one, a very thoughtful one. And I wish that Western protests in America and Europe would learn a thing or two about subtlety and about style from the women, the mothers and grandmothers and sisters of Buenos Aires and Argentina when they do those, that ritual, that silent ritual. Because there is a severity that obnoxious protesting and chanting and taking selfies of yourself kind of defeats and defames what was lost, what was truly lost by those who have been in bad states. So, but nevertheless, that gesture at this point becomes part of a symbolic signification again that we understand. We know the narrative to some extent, and we know how to place it within a historical lineage. Yes, it's a depraved one. Yes, it's a condemned one, but nevertheless, it makes sense to us. And I'm more, so to some extent, I think the hard work we have to do to answer Jonathan's question is to seek, and I'll bring up a figure who I don't often quote or cite. He's not a writer that I often deal with, but Enrique Vilas-Matas, who I believe is Spanish. He wrote a book called Bartleby and Company, which was essentially about all the writers in history who could have written great things, but then decided not to. They sort of chose otherwise, so they kind of unfulfilled in a ghostly fashion. These books that they could have written, these masterpieces. You know, he talks about Juan Rulfo of Mexico, who wrote Pedro Páramo, great kind of ghost story, perfect for our topic. You know, guy visits a whole town of the dead, only to discover, well, I won't spoil it, but if you haven't read it in 100 years, then it's your fault. So it's been around. But, you know, you take something, and he was, after he finished this masterpiece, he was perpetually you know, attacked by people in the streets asking him when he was going to write his next book. And he always looked at them enigmatically, why? I did it. What do I have to do next? But there were then other figures like Nietzsche with The Will to Power, who didn't finish his masterpiece. Bataille's last book, The Unfinished System of Non-Knowledge. He knows it though. Look at this, is very interesting. Whereas Nietzsche, you seemingly didn't know he would not have enough time to finish the book he wanted. Bataille titles his book The Unfinished System of Non-Knowledge because he wants to sacrifice it to ghostly incompletion. Right? I think that's a beautiful gesture. We have to not just go and read Kafka, an obscure, cryptic genius of his time. We have to try and see if we can find the writings on a handkerchief or on a napkin or on a piece of paper by the 7 other Kafkas who never manifested their works in his time. And they're out there. It takes a certain radar, it takes a certain sensitivity, an antenna almost, to trying to scavenge and find the most rare gemstones that never quite made it into the world, that faded sort of before their time, and therefore become kind of this this ghostly manifestation, like you're saying, these phantasms of almost there. I would say that's a really fun game to try and find those figures. And oftentimes what you need is a single sample. I know certain poets from the Middle East and from Latin America as well and other places who wrote one or 3 poems that have survived. One, for instance, Mahmoud al-Buraykan is one of my absolute favorites. Has a beautiful poem called The Tale of the Assyrian Statue, which is about an ancient Assyrian idol in the museum that he's terrified. And he's got another one called The Bedouin, which is all whose face no one saw. It's about a Bedouin figure who masks himself. There's only about 3 or 4 of his poems in existence, and the reason is he never published them. The reason there are 3 or 4 is that his friends knew he was such a sublime poet that they used to steal into his office and take his poetry and try and publish it. They only got away with 3. He learned how to hide them better. And it's a really, I'd like to end on that light note, but it's a sad ending for him because during the American occupation of Baghdad, was actually at age like 82 stabbed to death multiple times in his house by raiders. And so there's a kind of, it's a weird thing though. You know, even Kafka didn't want people to read his work. His last wishes were for his work to be burned. And so he preferred a kind of ghostliness than to be the iconic figure that he is now. But the best ones for me then are not the ones of whom we have no trace of evidence, because that's not a ghost. A ghost is not pure annihilation. A ghost is there's something there, something lingering, right? A half manifestation or a blur or a partial glimpse, right? Or a trace of air or smoke or fog, right? And that means for artists and writers and musicians and the creative types, I love to find the ones who wrote only one short story. But my God, it's hypnotic. It's backbreaking. It's a pure spell. They're out there. I think we need to focus more on those. And that's a way of converging the phantoms.
Thank you so much, Jason, for
pleasure.
being with us. And I just wanted to thank you once again and for closing the cycle in such a wonderful way. I hope that we can probably collaborate in a more formal manner in the future, if that's possible.
For sure, of course.
It's a pleasure for us. And I just wanted to thank everybody as well who came here, a todos los que vinieron hoy. Muchísimas gracias por haber asistido también a todo el ciclo de otros presentes. También les recomiendo mucho, si quieren entrar al programa que dirige Jason en Future Studies Program, pueden registrarse y están lanzando, digamos, un preview de las clases que ellos imparten en el programa. Entonces, pues muy recomendado. Y también pues recomiendo obviamente a las obras de Jason que pues, son fantásticas. Omnicide es más reciente en Urbanomic. Muy buen libro, absolutamente fantástico. Entonces también lo pueden conseguir por Urbanomic, Amazon, bueno. Y nada, pues también les queremos anunciar brevemente que estaremos pronto iniciando otros dos ciclos. La siguiente semana anunciaremos un ciclo para la Universidad de los Andes, creo que es, Santi.
Sí, sí.
Que pues estaremos publicando la información muy pronto, y también un ciclo sobre ciclonopedia, que estaremos abriendo el formulario muy pronto. Entonces, pues nada, thank you so much once again, Jason. I hope
Gracias
you have
Thank you, everybody.
Gracias,
So nice meeting all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Federico.
Have a wonderful week and chao. Gracias a todos.
Gracias, chao a todos.
Nos vemos.
Chao.